book, it feels, I don't know, it feels like the kind of perfect moment for it as well. There's something with the seasonal change that makes me always feel a bit more reflective, and this is a book that is deeply reflective, and it's not about seasons, but it's about seasons of life in lots of ways. So I found myself, as I was finishing reading it in preparation for this conversation, really feeling like it's landed in my lap at the right moment, if you know what I mean. It's a universe in a book, basically, and I feel like there's so many different places we can take the conversation. And I think before we get into kind of the questions I have, it might be useful to sort of explain to people a little bit about the Gifford Lectures, which was kind of, this book began its life as lectures.
Yeah.
And then maybe also a little bit about Spinoza, and then we can get into the book itself.
Yes, okay. So this book came about because I was invited to give some lectures at St Andrews University in Scotland, and so it was really written in response to this sort of external invitation, and the lectures were called the Gifford Lectures. They've been going since the 1880s, when this man called Lord Gifford left a ton of money to endow a lecture series in philosophy, and particularly like religious questions in philosophy. So in his will, he sort of described how the lectures were supposed to be, and so he said that they should be about the knowledge of God and of man's relationship to God, which sounded so intimidating. And they're also quite a sort of they're quite a distinguished lecture series. So I was aware of these other mostly men who'd given the lectures in the past, like William James is probably the most famous Gifford lecture. Anyway, so yes, it was quite a sort of, surprising and also quite a daunting invitation. And so of course I thought, well, what can I talk about? I don't have any knowledge of God to share with the people of St Andrews. And having just finished my second biography, I thought, well, like, one thing I know something about is life writing, because I've just written 2 biographies, and I've been thinking about the experience of writing a life, writing another person's life story, and that had generated some philosophical questions that I was already, I guess, thinking about. So I decided to take that as my theme. The kind of umbrella label that these Gifford Lectures are under is what's called natural theology, and basically natural theology is often contrasted with revealed theology, so the kind of religious teachings you get in the Bible or in the church, whereas natural theology is sort of traditionally more our natural human capacities for thinking and understanding, so reason most of all, but also I wanted to really, I guess, expand that sense of the natural capacities and think not just about reason, but our storytelling, our imaginative capacities, our empathy, and our lives and our life stories. So that's how the book began. And you wanted me to talk about Spinoza as well.
Let's pause for a minute, because that's also massive. But I think, you also write a lot about love and devotion in this book, which is something that I wonder how that felt to do as a philosopher, academic, who, in your kind of professorial life, I wonder how much love there is in that kind of world, right? And in the kind of writing you're doing when you've got your really academic hat on. And whether it felt like the lecture series opened a door to be able to bring all of that knowledge and expand it in this other direction.
Yeah, I guess I even though I'm not sort of conventionally religious, I'm quite in touch with my own sort of devotional side, and I guess I do think that human beings are devotional beings. Even my academic colleagues are devoted to their work, spending hours in the library, and just that idea that we give ourselves to things that we really care about, and we give our time, we give our energy, sometimes we give our sort of health, we give things up, not always wisely, but we sort of pour ourselves into the things that we most care about. And so that kind of devotion, it doesn't have to be religious, it could be, doing intellectual work, doing academic work, or gardening, or music, or whatever it might be, your family. So that is something I explore in the book, because it's about life writing, and it's about the shape of human lives and how a life takes shape. I think devotion's a really important part of that the things that a person gives themselves to shape the life. And if you want to understand the life and tell its story, then you need to figure out what the life is giving itself to, and what it keeps returning to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easy to think that those things happen separately, that like our serious thinking happens in one space and our devotional experience happens elsewhere.
Yes. So I do comment on this at the end of the book, in what was the last lecture, it's now the last chapter of the book, where I do say there's a kind of, perhaps a sort of disapproval of devotion among some philosophers, because it might be seen as a bit sort of childish or feminine, that it's not really rational to be devotional. But then I guess I explain that I don't mean it has to be a kind of superstitious devotion or even a reverential attitude. It's just this quite simple thing of giving yourself to what you value, and that even philosophers and perhaps especially philosophers do that too. Philosophy, the word means love of wisdom, and so I wanted to interpret that as not just sort of loving it in some kind of abstract sense, but kind of devotional, giving yourself to this pursuit of wisdom, whatever that might mean.
Right, and actually this is a nice way to bring Spinoza in, because your epigraph is, I'm not going to read the Latin, I will spare you all my terrible Latin pronunciation, but the English, while we pursue this end and devote ourselves to bringing the intellect back to the right path, it is necessary to live. And I really know very little about Spinoza and his ideas. Obviously it's a name I've heard many times and possibly pretended to know more about than I do to seem interesting to whoever it was I might have been devoting myself to at the time. But I think this idea that, it is necessary to live alongside our thinking and our intellectual advancement and our devotional practice and everything is such a modern idea, actually. It felt very fresh when I read that quote.
Yeah.
This idea that, it is necessary to live. It's such a powerful statement.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about Spinoza and about his presence in this book and in that series of lectures?
Yeah, Spinoza's my favourite philosopher. So I studied philosophy at university, so obviously I learned about lots of different philosophers. And in my third year I did a whole course on Spinoza, and just, kind of fell in love with his way of seeing the world and also his way of writing. He's very... he's, in a way, he seems like quite a dry and abstract writer, but he's very clear, and there's something about his calm clarity of thinking that I find kind of soothing and comforting. And so it's not just that I sort of like his ideas, but there's something about reading Spinoza and just inhabiting his universe, basically, and his way of seeing the world, that that I've always connected with. And he's famous for being a pantheist. So he doesn't want to distinguish between God and nature, and he says everything is in God. So even though he has this concept of God, there's lots of different ways you can interpret that. Many people interpreted him as an atheist, because he says that God is nothing but nature. But he's also been read as a very spiritual, very religious thinker who kind of transcends sectarian religious differences, which is something else I really like about him, because I'm a bit that way inclined myself. And
he was Adam Gifford's favourite philosopher.
That's right, yes. So I was really delighted. So because I had this quite fusty impression of what the Gifford lectures were, partly based on some of the kinds of people who've given them in the past, and often sort of quite Christian and quite kind of, I don't know, just sort of these distinguished archbishops of Canterbury or whatever. And I thought, oh my God, that is so not me. So I was quite daunted by that. And then when I read about Lord Gifford, I was really heartened to find that his favourite philosopher was Spinoza, that he was really into Indian philosophy. And I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. I can actually write about the things I really care about, rather than think I've got to kind of be this other kind of academic and try to be something else, which would have been just difficult to do. So
that's always where I think the most interesting ideas can come to light as well, because if you're fighting with your kind of authentic perspective as a thinker and a writer, then what comes out in the page ends up being muddled, I think, a lot of the time, because there's this idea that you're trying to please a kind of imaginary master, and it's not. The thing I found really striking about this book and the lectures, I'm sure, because they were the kind of beginning point, is just the clarity of the prose that you find, and it's so clear that clarity is because it's your thinking, like your genuine thinking, rather than. Do you know? I feel like I'm not being very clear, but I think it can be easy when you come to an institution like the Gifford Lectures to bend yourself to fit that mould, and it's wonderful that you didn't. But also, I wanted to ask you about how it was writing them for delivery, to be something ephemeral, and then translating them into a book, which is a very different thing from a lecture series.
Yes, and I wasn't planning on it being a book, and in fact I told them not to record the lectures because because I just wanted it to be ephemeral, actually, and for it to just be the kind of, in terms of the scale as well, like the intimacy of the lecture room. It's quite a big room, but still, the people were all there in a room together. I didn't want it on YouTube or whatever. So, so I thought that. So not only the kind of brief from Lord Gifford, but also the occasion and the situation I knew I would be in to be giving these lectures, as I'd be standing up and in this kind of professorial mode, and I thought quite a lot about that, and trying to think about ways to inhabit that again felt I guess authentic and felt like it was still me. And I mean, this book is more personal than any other book I've written. It's not. I mean, well, when I do the readings, you'll see. I'm probably going to read some of the most personal bits. It's not all personal, but there are these moments where I talk a bit about my own life, and the reason I did that initially was because of the occasion of being in the room, and I just felt, well, people are coming to hear these lectures, and they I just had the sense that they should know a little bit about who I was, this person standing here, as a human being, and not just as like professor philosophy or whatever. So I wanted to speak, just as a human being to other human beings, basically, and so I ended up bringing a little bit of my own experience in, and particularly experiences of loss and grief, because I think, as well, I mean, devotion's one thing that gives shape to a life, but also loss. And again, I mean, certainly writing the biographies of Kierkegaard and George Eliot, they both lost parents and siblings at quite young ages, and so I was really conscious of how those losses had shaped their lives and their paths and so on. So and loss is it's a shared human experience. So I wanted to bring my experience in, not because it was anything special, but on the contrary, that it was the shared experience, and so it was a way to kind of I wanted to connect with other people's experience on that level.
Right, and that sounds like something that Lord Gifford himself would have approved of, in that the lectures were meant to be open to non-academic people as well as...
Yes, and he has this really nice thing where he says, when he says that the lecture should be about knowledge of God, and he expresses his own kind of faith and optimism that there is, even though maybe that knowledge is ultimately kind of elusive, can we ever know God, but we should try. But he has this phrase, felt knowledge, and I like that emphasis on feeling as well as just thinking. And again, it's part of this sort of, I mean, it's interesting to think that, perhaps academia now is narrower than it was in we think of the Victorian era as this sort of more kind of narrow and repressive time, but maybe in philosophy it was a more liberal time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, surprising idea, actually, isn't it? But it does feel like, I mean, I'm no longer in academia at all, but when I was, it felt like the disciplines were narrowing and becoming more and more territorial.
Yeah.
And that's also to do with funding and politics and difficult things like that, right? But like, it's wonderful to be in the pages of this book. You really feel as a reader, that you get the benefit of being free from those constraints, you know, which is lovely. And I wonder, yeah, if that was made more possible by the fact that they were lectures first, and so you weren't thinking it. I'm sure that the form shaped how you thought about the ideas, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I was just thinking a lot about what do I have to say to people that's sort of worth saying, and this idea of being a teacher, and what do I have to teach anybody, you know, and so yeah, I thought a lot about that, and all the work I did was writing towards this. You know, I went up to St Andrews and spent 3 weeks there, and so I've edited it, but only very, very slightly, to turn it into a book. So it's really, yeah, what I wrote for that particular occasion.
Let's hear a reading.
Okay.
Let's do the first one.
So this is from chapter 2. Biography, life writing, is by definition a literary encounter with a life. It is an ancient art and still going strong. Is writing in some special way appropriate to a life? This entity that, whatever it may be, however elusive, certainly has a singular shape or form. Consider this childhood memory. When I was a little girl, before I started school, my mother taught me to write. First, I learned to write the alphabet with a pencil on lined paper. Letters were a mixture of curved and straight lines. An A was quite difficult. You began to draw a circle, but you didn't make it a whole circle. And then you put a straight vertical line on the right-hand side of it. B was a tall letter made from a circle and a vertical line twice the height of the A on the left side. When I wrote my name, I had to draw a C as tall as a B. The lined paper helped me get the proportions right. My mother's writing was round, clear, flowing, very beautiful. She could join all the letters in each word together. I tried to make my letters more beautiful, like hers. I tried hard not to make any mistakes. At some point in primary school, the daily act of writing became so habitual that I no longer thought about it. Even as a philosophy student and eventually a professional philosopher, I hardly paused to wonder, what is writing? What are we doing when we write? Recollecting the experience of learning to write helps to lift this veil of habit. When I bring my attention back to writing, I discover that in some ways it resembles life. Writing a text means drawing a certain line on a page. Living a life means drawing a certain line through the world. These lines move through space and through time. A path seems a fitting metaphor for writing as well as for life. In each case, you must find or make a path through terrain that is teeming with possibilities. And yet, the path of writing, like the path of life, can quickly acquire a trajectory that feels irresistible, even necessary. Often your path is formed by following others who have gone before you. Sometimes it is formed by choices, a decision to go this way, not that way. Every path is a combination of following and choosing whom to follow, and following others' choices. Every path is some combination of finding and making. Life is relational, and so is writing. It's the relationships between words and then between sentences that make a meaningful text. And in writing, as in life, linearity combines with complexity. On the one hand, the line of writing is unidirectional, it only moves forwards. On the other hand, yet at the same time, it loops, folds, gathers, knots, stitches itself together, forming layers. For example, a recurring metaphor, a rhyme, or a repeated word tacks one point in the line to another. Life shares this double character. It flows irrevocably in one direction. Sooner or later, it's taken me many years, we learn that we cannot travel back in time. Yet our experience continually folds back and loops forward, in memory, in habit, in the deliberate repetitions of practice and ritual. in all the moods of anticipation and in all the moods of looking back. The line of writing, like the line of living, has an intermittent and rhythmic quality. On paper, there are spaces between words. In our bodies, there are spaces between breaths, between heartbeats, between footsteps. In consciousness, there are longer intermittencies of sleeping and waking, and irregular intermittencies as attention lapses and returns. Underlying these stops and starts is a flow, such as the flow of blood through the body and the flow of thought, unconscious as well as conscious, that underlies the act of writing. A piece of writing, like a living being, has rhythm, and its rhythm is essential to its structure, how it moves, and its texture, how it feels. Inseparable from this rhythm is temporality. As soon as a text comes into being, it is there all at once on the page. Yet writing and reading are active imaginative experiences that unfold in time, bringing the text to life and sustaining it in existence, just as a footpath through the countryside is formed and renewed by each person or animal who walks along it. Likewise, we can distinguish these two aspects of a human life. It is a dynamic shape unfolding moment by moment, and it can be conceived as a whole. Then it transcends the flow of time. Indeed, this is an image of time, like an aerial view of a great river from its source to the sea, seen from miles above the earth, under the aspect of eternity, as Spinoza put it. When we imagine it this way, it becomes quite beautiful. A whole life, moving through the world from its source to its end, unique, slender, searching. A God looking down on it might well be moved to love, and also perhaps to tears.
Thank you. It's such a moving passage. And listening to you read it, I was also thinking, you know, a book is an inanimate object, but it's not a static thing. And as I was following you along that path and thinking, you know, just as like we all interpret human beings differently, right? There's the human being is a single entity, and yet your impression of one person and mine could be very different.
Yeah.
The same with a book. Each reader brings themselves to the text and takes something different from it. And this kind of question of how we can come together and sort of share a text. But I guarantee you, every single one of you will take something different from this conversation tonight. And when you read the book, if you haven't yet, you'll take something different from it. And I wonder if you, in writing it at its different stages, I know that there wasn't actually a hugely long time between when you delivered the lectures and when it became a book, but whether you have taken different things from it, returning to it at different stages.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as you know, having also written a book, you sort of get to know your book, not only while you're writing it, but afterwards, and you start to kind of figure out what it's about, or you realise that it's about things that you didn't know it was about at the time you were writing. So I guess I've thought quite a lot about. Well, I mentioned these themes on the one hand of loss and grief, and then thinking about philosophy and felt knowledge and the role of feeling in this devotional search for wisdom. And one of the things I guess I kind of knew it all along, but I think I only really kind of figured it out afterwards, was how, you know, in my case, my mum died just before I went to university. And I realised how, and that's when I started studying philosophy. I didn't do it at school. I just sort of discovered it. So it was in 1995, basically. My mum died in May, and then I went to Cambridge, and then by the autumn I was studying philosophy. And so it just occurred to me that my whole sort of engagement with philosophy has been in mourning. I've been in mourning, and how those two things have come together in my own life. I mean, it's quite, in a way, in my own life, it's quite a sort of my own particular story. It's quite stark how those things just happened at the same time. But it made me think about, how my own kind of reckoning with philosophy and what its boundaries are, and what it is, and whether it can make sense of the things that most matter or not, and that attempt to, I think when we lose, someone that we love and someone who's really important to us, we want to try and make sense of what's happened, and make sense of ourselves, and make sense of the world, and that's what philosophy does too. It tries to make sense of the world, and it's trying to make sense of what it is to be human. But it's such an obvious point, but it only really occurred to me, having written the book, how completely intertwined those experiences have been.
That's also the difference, it strikes me, between intellectual knowledge and felt knowledge, because obviously you knew that it's fact.
I knew the dates.
You knew the dates.
yeah.
But actually the knowledge that happens really deep within us.
Yes, exactly.
It can take years to form.
Just to sort of have that insight into something that's really quite a simple fact. But probably anyone who knew me would have been like, of course. But
I think I think it's really interesting, and actually that it leads me to a question I wanted to ask you, because one of the things at one point you write about how the idea of like whether philosophy can be therapeutic or is kind of therapeutic for philosophers when they do it, and as you sort of describe that loss was at the heart of your relationship to philosophy. I'm just thinking, yes, and also probably for every philosopher ever, it just maybe wasn't the loss of a parent, maybe it was the loss of their faith, or the loss of something else, right? But and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've studied philosophy without ever properly being a philosophy student, so I know a bit, but it's limited. But is there any philosophical question in the canon of sort of academic philosophy that doesn't come from a place of lacking the knowledge, or lacking the wisdom? Because it's always a question from a place of absence, right?
Totally. That's a really good insight. So I guess going back to Plato, and who was quite sort of reflective about what philosophy is, and this idea of this concept of eros, which is a kind of desire for something you lack. So that this idea that we're kind of seeking wisdom, and we sort of long for it and we desire it, but it feels out of reach, I guess. And then I guess connecting that with the loss that is part of the human condition. I mean, we talked earlier about this idea of the maternal milieu. So just to be born basically is to lose that kind of oneness with your. We all begin our life inside the body of our mother, and that birth is this kind of loss of that state, and then we. I mean, this is obviously what psychoanalysis is all about. That the child has to kind of navigate the loss of its mother, whether the mother might be alive and be present, but still she's coming and going, and her attention gets mixed, and she's perhaps unpredictable and moody or whatever, So this is just an experience of being human, and how confusing that is. And so I think philosophy often begins in confusion. It's also, and I talk about this in the book as well, begins with wonder. Traditionally, Plato and Aristotle both say philosophy begins with wonder, where it's like, I don't know, you're looking up at the stars and just like, what, how does all this exist? How do I exist? And just that experience of wonder that we human beings have sometimes. And I think that's connected to loss as well in a way. I mean, I remember as a child, sort of my mother's face, and how kind of she'd come in, and her face seemed sort of so beautiful to me that it was almost like incomprehensible, and, that, and I think so again, wonder, loss, confusion, these are human things, and maybe philosophy does come out of them, although you wouldn't necessarily know it if you picked up.
Well, this is the thing, right? This is the thing.
Philosophy textbook.
Exactly it, because it's one of those things where it's something that I've always found frustrating about the discipline of philosophy is that it is exactly as you describe it. It's all of those enormous, massive, animating, deeply felt things, and yet the discipline can be intensely dry and hard to access. And you know, it like when you're bringing those ideas into contact with life writing and lived experience like this, and that Spinozan idea of like you have to also live, is like is what it makes them accessible and interesting and kind of, I think I found myself as I was reading it, I was like, I'm doing philosophy all the time. Just by living, I'm doing philosophy all the time in a way. And also, you know, describing that relationship with seeing your mother's face, it goes both ways, doesn't it? As a mother, your baby's face is like that for you as well. It's this kind of universe of reciprocal wonder. And then you know, the classic sort of psychoanalytical idea that there's the birth is separation, and then the second separation happens into language. So I was thinking about that in your passage of learning how to write from your mother, and how you know, suddenly you bring language into the relationship and more misunderstanding can happen because the communication isn't just this bodily connection and this feeling as the child you have all your needs met before you even articulate them, and then suddenly you have to actually ask for things, and you can get things that you don't want, which is painful. But I would love actually to get you to just talk a little bit more about this idea of the milieu, because it's one of the big ideas in the book, and I think it's actually quite central to how one of the things that the book, it strikes me, does is it constructs a new milieu for these ideas and for the reader to kind of participate in. And I was really struck by it, and I think it would be great to kind of bring it out.
So milieu sort of means world. You might probably heard of the word. So it's a French word that means it means middle. So if you say something, or milieu is in the middle, but then it also means surrounding. So the English equivalent is sort of words like surroundings or environment, and these were concepts that really got crystallized in the 19th century, basically, with this idea that the sort of scientific idea with Darwin and others that living beings have to adapt to their environment. So this idea that every living being has its milieu, its surrounding conditions of existence. If it's a plant, it's like it's the soil, it's the climate, it's the weather, the seasons, all this stuff. And then the idea that human beings are we're not just in a natural milieu, but we're in these social, cultural worlds, and that's sort of our communities, but also our sort of our religious, cosmological milieu, the worlds we inhabit. And so the third chapter of the book is called the milieu, because in the second chapter I have this idea of life as a path and a line, and then in the third chapter I then think of it more as a sphere, and this idea that we each inhabit a milieu, beginning with the maternal milieu that we then we then have to sort of transition out of sooner or later. But also the book. So each life, we share a milieu. Like here we are all in Hackney. We're all, just the fact that we're all kind of alive at the same time is, and the same place and everything. And so we're all kind of neighbours, and so we're in the same milieu to some extent. But then we also will go off to our different worlds, whether family life or different cultural outlooks and so on. So it's this idea that each singular life, each singular life has its milieu and kind of expresses that milieu. That's part of what it is to read the life, is to see it as an expression of a world. And so no two beings will have exactly the same milieu, but no two milieu would be entirely separate either. So our worlds kind of overlap basically and intersect with other worlds. And then of course we can think about the cosmos, but then because different people have different views of the cosmos, we're not actually all inhabiting the same one. So there's all these, you get into these really big questions about like pluralism basically, like how do we make sense of the fact that people have different ontologies, different ideas about what's fundamentally real. So there's that aspect of it, but then it's also this very intimate idea of the maternal milieu as well. So it kind of goes from the most immediate and the most intimate to the most cosmic. And I guess I've been really drawn to writers who kind of use writing to invoke and create a milieu. Like Proust is a really good example where he tried to like recreate the whole world that he inhabited, like this particular stretch of history in maybe in Paris, but also in the countryside in France, and tried to create a work of art that would be that world that a reader could enter and also share and inhabit. Although, as you say, everyone gets a different experience from reading a book. So again, we've got those kind of overlapping but not entirely coinciding milieu.
Yeah, and you talk in the book about sort of the job of the biographer and the life writer, when you're writing about other people's life, is to kind of map the milieu of the person you're writing about.
Yeah.
And kind of give context. And I wonder, when we're trying to think about our own milieu, because obviously when you're writing about the life of somebody who's no longer living, there's a beautiful passage in this book where you talk about the fact that, people often describe only lives that have gone from cradle to grave over 90 years or something as being complete.
Yeah.
And the idea that if you die younger, it's not a complete life is an absurd idea. A life is complete regardless of how long it lasts.
Yeah.
But when you're kind of with your biographer hat on, looking at somebody like George Eliot, for example, or Kierkegaard, and you're looking at their milieu, and you're bringing your academic faculties to it as well, and you're kind of creating this world for your reader. But how clearly can we ever see our own milieu? And the second part to that question, I suppose, and this is me speaking also as someone who wrote a memoir, which isn't trying to create an entire milieu, but is offering a slice of one's own lived experience to a reader.
Yeah.
And in this book, you bring, for the first time in your kind of publication history, your own life to the page, in moments, in fragments. But how clearly can we ever see our own milieu?
Yeah. Well, I think art is a really good way of seeing it better. And I don't think I was deliberately trying to create my milieu in writing the book, but I decided to just, well, for one thing, just talk about the things that matter to me, and also that I know about. And I already knew lots about George Eliot and Kierkegaard and Spinoza, so of course I brought all that to writing the book. But I didn't want to sort of pretend to have this kind of detached God's eye view, and to some extent it's quite random, the things we end up knowing a lot about. It's because I had such a great lecturer, Susan James, in my third year at Cambridge. She taught me Spinoza, and that was really important. That introduced me to it. Or my husband, who shared his, well, not just like all sorts of things, how to do philosophy, but how to listen to music, but also the very concept of milieu. And so the fact that it's our human interactions that go towards constructing a kind of intellectual milieu. So I ended up talking a little bit about how those ideas have been transmitted to me by my teacher, by my husband, by other people who are either authors I've read or whatever. And that's the way, again, it's the way a life gets made, isn't it? Through these what maybe seem to be quite happenstance encounters that can go on to really shape a life. I had no idea when I went to those lectures as an undergraduate that I'd end up writing a book about Spinoza. That did not occur to me at all. But that is what ended up happening. So I wanted to just sort of allow that I guess the contingency of my own perspective to just be the shape of the book, and not try to do a kind of survey, and also just I think just to make a principle of I'm just not going to talk about something if I don't like it, if I'm not interested in it. I'm just going to leave it alone, instead of sort of thinking, there should be a bit about this, or just not wanting to aspire to any kind of sort of universal coverage or anything like that, which of course would be impossible anyway, but just to kind of lean into the things that mattered to me, and that I had a personal connection with, and then I guess what resulted is a sort of, it is my milieu that's in the book. Here are some of the things that are most important to me, but it wasn't exactly that I was trying to do that, but it's an interesting sort of side effect maybe.
Yeah, well, I sort of wonder, it feels like it's kind of the unconscious of the book, and it drove itself in that direction, because that's what you were thinking about. And I'm going to read a quote that I really loved from this, which anyone who writes in any capacity, I think, will really relate to. When you write, when reading or writing philosophy, literary style is for me as open to question as the metaphysical or the epistemic assumptions that we philosophers pride ourselves on testing. An author's search for the right voice and form, inseparable of course from seeking the right words, can yield as close an encounter with truth as searching for the best argument. I literally wrote yes exclamation mark in the book there, because it's so true. And again, that thing you just said about giving yourself permission to just leave everything else by the wayside, like the form of these as lectures, I wonder if that was partly enabled by that, again, as you were saying at the beginning, that they were designed in your mind at the time to be completely ephemeral. Therefore you weren't, I wonder if it was that you were also free from thinking about this as like, I have to give an account of this, that's like, you know, a huge long text with all of this kind of totalizing view.
I mean, to be honest, I did feel the weight of that expectation, and because often, you know, these Gifford lectures become these big books, and they, and I deliberately sort of went against that, I guess, and just I'm not going to do that. And so that was quite a deliberate. So I felt the weight of the expectation. I knew there'd be, you know, academic philosophers in the audience and other academics from other disciplines. It's really difficult, because even though they're supposed to be general audience, so you have to write in a successful way, but you know that there's going to be loads of academics there, like judging you. So you've got those two very different sort of audiences in mind. But I thought, well, you know, they've invited me. You know, if they invite a sort of Kirch or biographer to come and give these lectures, this is what they're going to get. Basically, they're not going to get a, you know, I don't know, a more sort of conventional approach to the subject.
Yeah. On the lack of convention, at one point in the book you describe including in your Eliot biography half a paragraph comparing Gwendolen from Daniel Deronda to Princess Diana.
Yes.
And I was really struck by this. I think partly also because in this book you include a photograph of the flowers. And it brought back such a vivid memory of going with my mother to see them, because she was like, this is a massive event, and I don't know, I'm 39, I can't do the maths, but I was a child. I was a child who was old enough to understand that this was a big thing, so it kind of
would have been like 10, I think.
Around that exactly. And like, you know, I didn't grow up in a family that was royalist or particularly interested, but Diana was this huge figure, and I was a little girl and I was interested in princesses, so that was kind of, you know, part of the story. That was part of my milieu. But seeing this image in this book brought that right back. And I'm just thinking what you were saying then about how there's a little bit of a rebellious spirit in here generally, and in you, I think, you know, which is like this wonderful thing. But you write about your editor kind of raising an eyebrow to your decision to include Princess Diana in that biography. And it made me think a lot about that kind of, and you've touched upon it tonight, there's moments where institutions or structures want to disavow the feminine, they want to shut it out because it's not considered serious, it's not considered worthy. And we all know that that's a nonsense, but it can be very difficult to push back against it. And I don't know Daniel Deronda well. I've not read it. I think I've seen a not very good TV adaptation. But reading your description of Gwendolen as a character made me want to read it again. She sounds like
she's amazing.
Fun character. I wonder if you can talk a bit about that. I was just curious to know more about it, about that comparison with Diana, and why that felt like the right thing to do in that book, and then And then also, why bring it back in this one?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so there's a slight sort of meta thing where, so in this book I describe a conversation I had with my editor when we were editing my George Eliot biography, where I bring in this comparison just right at the end of the biography. There's a sort of final bit where I kind of step back a bit and talk in a somewhat freer way and a bit more in my own voice in this biography about the meaning of George Eliot's life and what she means to me. Anyway, so it's in there, and he was like, "Ugh," he sort of drew this like wavy line by it. I was like, "Oh dear, do we need this?" And luckily he had this like very cool like young female assistant who was like, I really like the Diana bit, and so it got kept in. But yeah, so
she's doing the Lord's work, that young woman.
And then I sort of bring this up here, and that's because I'm trying to remember why I kind of go off on this in here now. But it's this idea of radiance actually and goodness, and the way a life can transmit the good. We have this phrase, a shining example, this idea that a person can be radiant, and that goodness itself is something that shines and has this kind of beauty. And a big part of the argument of the book is that that's the case even when the person might be very flawed. Like, this is not about a person being a saint. And the thing I really liked about both Gwendolen Harleth in Daniel Deronda and Diana is that they're not like saintly at all. And Gwendolen's just this sort of young, frivolous, vain, very self-centered, pretty girl who's just trying to kind of, make a good life for herself. And so she's not at all saintly, and yet there's still something in her that's searching for goodness. And so it's this idea that if even Gwendolen, is doing this, then we can do it too. And so I think that's partly sort of maybe George Eliot's message in the book. But then I was thinking about Diana, who is really like remarkably similar to Gwendolen in all sorts of ways. But again, is a very complex woman, and there's this great story about her pushing her stepmother down the stairs.
I remember that one.
And I, as someone who has a stepmother, I love this story. And I'm like, oh yes, I don't know if it's even a true story about Diana, but anyway, so she read trashy novels, she was into fashion, so she's this, in a way, she's this very ordinary person, but she also, at the same time, did shine with a kind of beauty that wasn't just her physical beauty, although it was also that, but also the way she connected with people, the way she would touch an AIDS patient, or she'd go and sort of visit a sick child, or she'd go and walk across landmines. And you could take a cynical view of it, but I think that those are manifestations of something real, of a real recognition of what is good and what is valuable. And it's not just the fact that she did those things, but the way other people responded to that and saw the value of that. And I think that's why people were so moved by her story, and why there was this massive outpouring of grief when she died. There was a loss of something that was beautiful and radiant, and that kind of symbolised that. And again, it's not because she was a saint or perfect. She was just a sort of, in a way, kind of ordinary, flawed human being. Like the rest of us. So that's kind of part of quite a bit of the book is about ordinary lives and how they might transmit something that we can learn from, and how we do learn from each other's lives all the time, don't we? So.
Right, and I think we're also seeking to. We want to.
Yes.
I think there is like in most people, there is a longing for that kind of knowledge. Like,
yes.
How do I live? What does a good life look like?
Yes.
And I was thinking, listening to you as well, about like this moment we're in the culture now of kind of like neoliberal optimization, like having as much control over every part of your life as possible, your body, your fitness, your diet, like all of this longevity nonsense, like this kind of total fixation. And as you were talking particularly about the milieu and the fact that, a lot of what makes up one's milieu is an accident or not, it's just encounters that happen to you. And obviously we make choices, and when you describe that life as a path, you know, you're talking about, and like in your reading, we choose to turn this way or that way, but there's so much that's beyond our control and beyond our ability to choose, and things that happen to us, or that knock into us and change the course of our life
completely.
And that's very hard for people to accept, right? I think a lot of the time. Let's have the second reading, because I'm aware we're going to go to questions in about 10 minutes. So I hope you guys have lots of questions. I've got loads if you don't. So.
Okay, so this is from the beginning of chapter 4, which is called, the chapter is called Incarnations. A couple of years ago, while I was writing my biography of George Eliot, I passed the age my mother was when she died. In the spring of 1994, she was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and she died on the 1st of May the following year, a few days before her 45th birthday. My mother did not follow any religion, and during that last year of her life, certain questions, spiritual questions, let's say, became pressing. Her GP, a stern elderly lady doctor who had a special liking for her, took her to church a few times, but she didn't find what she was searching for. Instead, she got in her old Mini and drove up to the Isle of Skye. It was a long way, 9 or 10 hours drive from our Manchester suburb. She stayed in a little white house high above the sea on the island's northwest coast. At the end of the long summer between A-levels and university, I went there with my father to scatter her ashes, and the couple who owned the house told me she used to spend hours sitting on the hillside, looking out to sea. Among her notebooks I found some writing she'd done on Skye. Somehow I managed to lose those notebooks, and I only remember one line. If I had a life before, then it was here. As I turned 45, then 46, I felt myself no longer following in my mother's footsteps, but going on ahead of her. It was strange to think of her as a younger woman, someone who might learn from me. At the same time, writing about George Eliot gave me a sense of returning home to something she and I shared after I'd ventured far away from her experience by going to Cambridge, studying philosophy, meeting so many different sorts of people, practicing yoga and meditation, travelling to India, eventually, improbably, becoming a philosophy professor. My mother loved books, but she'd left school at 16 and married young. In her 30s, once my sister and I were at school, she went to evening classes to take A-levels in English literature and sociology. She left Britain twice in her life for holidays in France and Spain. She worked part-time at the local hospital, booking appointments. She was seen mainly as a daughter, a wife, and a mother. She probably never heard of Kierkegaard or Spinoza or any of the philosophers I discovered at university a few months after she died. But one or two of George Eliot's novels were on the bookcase in our house. Now I was returning to those novels with everything I'd learned over 25 years, and finding that much of it was already there. My mother was the sort of person for whom Lord Gifford endowed his lectures on natural theology. He taught evening classes and Sunday school classes, and he wanted the Gifford lectures to be, quote, public and popular, open to the whole community, whether receiving university instruction or not. When I think of my mother sitting on that hillside, looking out to sea, considering her life and her death, wondering where her soul had been, and, I imagine, where it might be going, I ask myself if I have anything to teach her. And when I say her, I also mean anyone, the part of us that is simply human, living on this earth beneath a blue or clouded sky, with some time to wonder, who am I?
Thank you. It's such a beautiful passage. It's also, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like this question of what we have to teach one another. Obviously, when you're in a professional role as a teacher, as a professor, you're like, there's like, maybe a clearer context in that part of life. But then, you know, when you think about yourself in your milieu, like as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, I don't think sort of, don't know where I'm going with this question. I think I'm thinking about how, like, obviously we're learning from each other all the time, and we're teaching each other all the time without being very conscious of it.
Yes, exactly.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. And I wonder what the kind of, I don't know, what do you think that, like, that will to learn is rooted in for human beings? It's a massive question.
This is why how would I know? How would I know? Well, I don't know. I have this idea at the moment. It connects back with what you were saying about lack, and a feeling of lack, and that kind of spurring us on and giving us a sort of desire to learn. So there's that, but there's also, and I think that's true. I'm sure we can all relate to that. But there's also, maybe conversely, I think a kind of excess that we have, that that we want more. This idea that we're not just contained within what is, but we're growing. Of course, you know, children are growing in very visible ways, but I think we're always growing, because we're always enlarging our experiences, and of course we can do that in different ways. We can just have like more of the same, or we can enlarge our experience perhaps in more enlarging ways, and so maybe sort of wanting to learn is part of that as well, that kind of excess of being that we have, that means that it actually connects with what's right at the end of the book, when I talk about this image that Proust has of a human being as a giant. And he says that, you know, because I think if you think of all the time that a human life occupies, you look at a human body and it doesn't take up a lot of space, but when you think of all the time that each of us has lived and all the experiences in that time, we're these immense giants, and we're continually getting bigger, basically, and of course, you know, this is, you know, as a biographer, thinking about all, you know, what is a life and what kind of thing is it, and it's this immense, it's both immense and very slender and sort of fragile at the same time. And that's something I've been really struck with as a biographer, is that getting that sense of the being of my subjects as both these giants, but then also kind of frail threads and paths that can be easily, I guess, snapped off. So
as you were talking, I was literally imagining a person's experiences being pulled out and put into a book, and a book which takes up more space.
Yes.
Pages and pages and pages,
exactly,
and then the time it takes to read a book about a life.
Yeah.
And what percentage of our life do we then devote to that book we read about somebody else's life? It's time that we're living, And also the fact that, yes, one human life takes up a lot of space in time, and also no space at all in the time of the cosmos.
Exactly, yes.
It's a real, like, 5 a.m. chat. I feel like, but yeah, it's the kind of, but this is what I find so wonderful about philosophy, though, because I do think that, like, most people who've been teenagers have had these thoughts in some way or another, right? It's one of the reasons I'm always so, like, stick up for teenagers when they get a bad rap, because actually, in a way, they're at that stage of life, we're so open to these huge thoughts, and then reality crashes down around us and responsibilities hit us, and we narrow our thinking, but by necessity often. Yeah. And then, you know, I wonder if, and this is the last question I'll ask before I throw it open to you guys, but if you think, you know, that biography is a form of writing and also reading that can open us up against those philosophical questions, if we found ourselves kind of narrowed by life, by our own lives.
Yeah, I'm sure it can be. I mean, obviously biography is quite an elastic genre, so there's sort of, you know, there's these kinds of biographies that are not always the most, like, philosophically. But I suppose, you know, obviously I have all this philosophical training, and then I wrote biographies of two philosophers, you know, Kierkegaard and George Eliot, and so of course It's kind of ripe for philosophical questions. But yeah, I also think that any life does raise those questions, whether a biographer is sort of alive to them or not. But I think maybe one of the reasons why biography is quite a popular genre is that it's quite sort of expanding to inhabit, get a sense of what it's like to be another person, basically, and to be in a different world. And of course, other kinds of life writing, like fictional life writing, does that too, doesn't it? You know, I mean, I want to be, in the book I'm quite elastic about fictional and non-fictional life writing. So, you know, I also see, like Proust and George Eliot, and as also doing life writing, even though they're doing it in a more fictional or semi-fictional mode. But yeah, I think, literature, basically, books are these means for growth, both for the writer but also hopefully for the readers as well.
Yeah.
And of course, we're all probably here because we love books, and so I think part of the experience of reading is that, isn't it? That expansion that we feel, and also the sort of quietness and intimacy of reading as well.
Yeah, it's both this like profoundly personal experience and something that connects you with a whole new milieu, I guess.
Yes.
The milieu that the book itself contains, which is that of the writer, and
it becomes yours as you're reading it. But you're now in this world as well, and it will also always, that experience will always remain a part of your life because of the time you've given to it.
Yeah.
I
think it's a really lovely place to open out to questions from you guys. I think we've got half an hour, 20 minutes. Oh my god, my alarm, there we go, that's me telling me to stop. So if you just want to raise your hand if you've got questions for Claire, be great to hear. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for that really interesting conversation. I have a question about the kinds of writers that you're interested in. So Eliot and Kierkegaard, both being writers who write from a lot of different perspectives and have maybe this interesting kind of a multiplicity of perspectives. And I wondered if that related to Spinoza in any way.
That's a brilliant question. How can I answer this? I suppose. George Eliot was really influenced by Spinoza, so I definitely see her as a Spinozist author. I mean, she translated Spinoza before she started to write fiction, so she really sort of deeply absorbed his way of thinking and his way of seeing the world, and the interconnectedness of everything, and not just that we're interconnected, but that the way, just the way we're kind of always formed by our interactions with others. So we're not these sort of autonomous, independent, self-contained substances. That's one of Spinoza's big arguments against Descartes, for example. So this idea of the multiplicity of beings and their porousness, the way they shape each other. I mean, Kierkegaard's quite a different case because he has all these different authorial personas. I mean, George Eliot's authorial persona is fairly consistent. As a her narrator, she has this distinctive narrative voice, doesn't she? That's quite. And of course, she's got these different characters in the novel, but she's there, being George Eliot, and whereas Kierkegaard's much more kind of multiple in his authorial perspective. And his narrative, his use of different narrative voices and trying to occupy. They're not even characters. I mean, he tried to write something that was fictional, and it just isn't very good. He's not very good at kind of bringing a person to life. But what he does do is dramatize different philosophical positions, and it's all very experimental and it's very ambiguous. And so I think that maybe their multiplicities are quite different, and I think Eliot's is a very Spinozist multiplicity where you've got a kind of God's eye view with the omniscient narrator, whereas I think maybe Kierkegaard's probably doing something different.
Can I ask something following on from that? Do you think Eliot would have got on with Kate if she had found him something, either as a person or as a thinker.
Poor Kierkegaard. He did. A lot of people found him quite difficult, and even he had some good friends, but they were
Oh my God, the poor guy.
they were quite sort of long suffering, basically. Yeah. So I don't know. Stupidly, I've actually never thought about this, about what might happen if they were, in a room together and I was there as well. Yeah. Gosh. I just, I guess they both have a kind of deep seriousness, and also combined with humour. I think that's actually a feature that both writers have, is that combination of sort of earnestness and then irony and comedy and humour. I think they're both really kind of bring almost those two extremes together really well. They're also both exceptionally sensitive artists, so maybe they would have bonded over, the experience of getting like a bad review, which and struggling at that experience. I think they would have been able to, yeah, I don't know.
So it's a good thought.
Yeah, I have to think about it.
Oh, sorry.
You go ahead first and then we'll go. I couldn't see the person behind, so yeah, front row first and then we'll go back.
I'm curious about the title of your book, so if you could expand on that.
Yes. Well, as mentioned, these Gifford lectures are, specifically about God and broadly speaking, religious and ethical questions. And so, of course, I was trying to figure out what to call them. And so I knew they were going to be about life writing, but I was trying to think of a title, and I didn't want the word God, and I didn't want the word religion, because they both just, I don't know, sort of they'd signal something that isn't really what I'm doing. But I wanted to think of another way to articulate or to express something of that nature, I guess. So then I thought about the word transcendence, and I think, aesthetically, I think it's a beautiful word. So that's appealing, but also it's quite an open-ended concept that does evoke maybe religious subject matter, but it doesn't really specify it in any way, because it literally just means moving beyond. That's what transcendence means, and so it's quite open-ended as to what's moving beyond what, basically. And so part of the idea was, I guess this goes back to what I was saying about expansion and growth, is that we have these kind of narrow selves that we often get a bit trapped in, and narrow self-images, ways of thinking about ourselves and our lives, and often they're just sort of ideas that maybe we've inherited from our culture, and so the idea that philosophy is the sort of questioning of philosophy is about kind of expanding and going beyond those narrow boundaries, but not just philosophy, but also the religious life too. So it has that connotation, and then with beginners, it's got quite a few different meanings. So part of it's sort of a joke in a way, that you could have a guidebook on transcendence, that like you'd have Latin for beginners, or you might have, I don't know, golf for beginners or something, and then transcendence for beginners, like it's a sort of a slightly silly, playful thing. But then also, I guess the idea of beginnings, I talked about philosophy beginning with wonder and beginning again and again, and this sort of devotional movement of return, and we keep beginning again with that practice of philosophy. And also thinking a lot about childhood. Obviously, if you think about the shape of a life, childhood is like really important. When we try to understand our lives, we often go back to childhood experience, don't we? And obviously psychoanalysis is doing this. And yeah, I guess I wanted childhood and a kind of childlike perspective to have a place in the book, because often it isn't really part of serious philosophy. So yeah, it's also that as well. Actually, so I was sort of thinking about these things, but It was my husband who suggested the title quite early in the process, and I was like, that's a really nice title. I wonder what it might mean. So the title was kind of like a question in a way that accompanied me through writing the lectures, and I wasn't sure if it would be the title. It was a kind of working title that was also a question, and then it just sort of stuck around and became the title of the lectures and then of the book. But yeah, it's kind of an intriguing title, isn't it? Because it's not clear what it might mean, and I guess I like that about it.
Also, just thinking about the passages you read and what you were saying about your relationship with philosophy as a discipline beginning in 1995.
Well,
right?
that's true.
And
I
that
wasn't thinking
becomes-
about that at the time,
Right,
but
it's
yes,
like, it kind of works with that strand as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose, and again, there's something subversive about the kind of, again, this sort of Gifford lecture scenario where I'm the professor and I'm supposed to know stuff, and this idea that when it comes to, what matters most, we don't know what's going to happen to us after we die. We don't know why we're here. Like, we're all beginners when we're confronted with those kinds of questions, and so I guess I wanted to acknowledge that rather than kind of put myself in this sort of pseudo wise position.
I can't see where the other question was, but go
Yes.
ahead.
Yeah.
I was just interested to know, with your two biographies, what your process was for deciding how to approach them and structure the books and find a way in.
So it was different for each book. So with the Kierkegaard biography, I remember that sort of came about the time I write that book in conversation with an editor, and so I didn't really have a plan, but I started thinking about it having had this conversation, and then I just got this I thought about this opening scene of Kierkegaard being on a train, and when he was 30 years old, it's the first time he'd ever been on a train, and he's kind of in motion and he's moving forwards, and he has this quote about, you can only understand backwards. You have to live forward, but you can only understand backwards. So I just had this kind of opening scene and just wrote it. It was part of the proposal for the book, but it was quite just sort of didn't really plan it. So I had this opening scene, and then I really felt with that book that I didn't want to have this position of the observer on Kierkegaard's life, the kind of omniscient biographer who knows how everything's going to turn out in the end, that he's going to become the father of existentialism, he's going to become this famous writer, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to, because that's a very un-Kierkegaardian way to look at a human being. He's all about the inner life, subjectivity, the fact that we're moving through existence and we don't know what the future holds. So I wanted to find a form that was sort of accompanying Kierkegaard on facing this uncertain future, which meant sort of writing it from his point of view. I mean, it's written in the third person, but that meant I ended up being limited to kind of stuff he would have been aware of at the time. So it also ended up moving back and forth in time, because I couldn't begin with his childhood, and I got to his childhood there was a period in his life where he started thinking about his childhood, so I sort of got there and then showed him thinking about his childhood and trying to make sense of his life. So it was quite an unconventional. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I wasn't like, I'm trying to have an unconventional structure. This is just the sort of what emerged. So it wasn't totally chronological, and some people really liked that and other people didn't like it. And then I guess with the George Eliot book, it was more straightforward, I guess, in that it had this quite chronological structure that matched up with her novels. But I think in both cases it was a case of trying to find a voice that felt true to the subject. And I guess because of George Eliot's omniscient narrator, I felt a little bit more entitled to kind of play that role in narrating her life. Like, it felt more appropriate, basically, to do that. And to kind of interject with my opinions from time to time, whereas with the Kierkegaard biography I was very reticent and really tried to hold myself back. But yeah, so it was sort of the shapes of the books came about through trying to think about the subject of the book and how to tell their life story. Also because they're books about philosophers, and I wanted to explore their philosophies and explore their ways of thinking about the human being, and I wanted to kind of enact and sort of dramatise their philosophies in the book, and so the form of the book was also a way to try to introduce the reader to that way of thinking through the structure of the book.
We've got time for one more quite quick one, please. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not quite sure how to put this, but I was thinking about the self-trust that you have, and that you, as an academic philosopher, you write about your mother, and clearly, you go back to the island of Skye and you sit where she sat. That what role that played in you being able, as an academic philosopher, to bring in your own experience, because as far as I can remember from doing philosophy at university and taking a certain interest in it since then, this is utterly forbidden. I mean, it wasn't even thought about. That what bearing would it have on the fact that I love my mother? I'm just curious about what she gave you in being able to trust that you are both worthy as an academic philosopher, but you can bring these personal things into, as you do so wonderfully in this book.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, I was quite nervous about doing it, and because it is the first time, and I mean, I should say that the passages I've read are among the most personal in the book. So much of it is, I don't want you to be disappointed, but much of it is sort of not so personal as those bits. But yes, I sort of allowed that to sort of creep in. To be honest, many of those passages came in sort of unplanned. So I think with the bit I've just read about my mum going to Skye, that wasn't originally there, and I think I'd written I'd started just after that, and then I don't know, I just started thinking about I don't know why, I just started thinking about it, and then I just thought I talked to someone about it and was quite kind of emotional as I was telling them, and then I ended up just writing that, basically, that this experience of passing the age of my mother, and then that evoking these questions that are totally pertinent to these lectures, which is, what do I have to teach another human being? Here I am, a teacher, a professor, but what do I have to teach? And so it did all kind of it sort of connected, but I wasn't planning to do that. It was more that those bits, I ended up writing them. And then the kind of bit I was nervous about was like, do I leave them in or not? And do I actually read that when I go and give the Gifford lectures? Do I include it or not? And I just thought I was just going to go for it. And actually, I think people appreciated it. I think partly because it can be quite boring sitting and listening to a very dry philosophy lecture. So actually, if you've got, I mean, this is something I really learned from George Eliot, the way she uses narrative to, I mean, she's working with extremely rich and often quite technical philosophical material, but she is able to sort of translate that with this very light touch into these narratives that people can read and understand. And it was only when I went back to her after doing philosophy for 2 decades that I realised how much philosophy and erudition was there. Like, I hadn't even noticed it when I read her for like A-level or whatever. So I guess, thinking that it is, I think readers and audiences do appreciate having that connection, that human connection. But yeah, it was quite, I was quite scared of doing it. And I'm scared of what probably my academic colleagues won't bother reading it anyway, so it's fine. But I'm a little bit nervous about it. But then I just think, well, why not, Yeah,
and there's this kind of mad thing in the traditions of academic disciplines, this idea that we check our humanity at the door, when actually our humanity is what everything we're thinking is grounded in. It's a madness, actually. It's kind of, I think it's almost a big lie that universities are founded on, that like the objective perspective, it doesn't really exist. I mean, we can strive for it, but we are like within our own milieu all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's quite a Kierkegaardian thought as well. Just one last thing to say is that I was really inspired by the painter Celia Paul, who I got to know while sort of working on the book, and so I, you know, I read her. She's got these two great books, Self Portraits, which is about her own life. So she's sort of life writer as well as a painter. Then this other book called Letters to Gwen John. Anyway, she writes about how she wanted to paint her mother because she wanted to paint something that mattered to her. And she just says in the book, I wanted to paint something that mattered to me. She was an art student with these like life models, and she felt like, why am I painting these sort of people who I don't know? I want to paint what matters to me. And then she writes, what mattered most to me was my mother. And she just said that, and when I read that, I was just like, oh my God, that's true, you know, and that's how I feel. And philosophy is also about what matters to us, and what matters to me is,
you just said, you know, you check that at the door.
Yes, but I decided for this book, I decided not to.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful place to end. Exactly. Hallelujah. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Claire. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you.